I froze mid-step, my fingers gripping the cold iron gate, when I heard her voice behind me, soft, deliberate, almost conspiratorial. "It's safer if you stay here tonight." I turned slowly. The words weren't strange, just the way she said them, as if she knew something I didn't, as if the night itself had bent around her presence. She stood in the dim light of the porch, the shadows curling around her like smoke, a glass of water in one hand, the other brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Even in that small gesture, she seemed both confident and fragile, like someone carrying the weight of a story she wasn't telling. I swallowed, my throat dry, and suddenly the chill of the evening felt irrelevant. She was closer than I remembered, closer than any boundary should allow, and I caught the faint scent of jasmine mixed with something warmer, candle wax, maybe, or her perfume, and my chest tightened without warning. I started, but the words stumbled out into nothing. She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips, eyes that seemed to measure me, see me, and weigh every unspoken thought. There was a lightness in her gaze, a familiarity, and yet something dangerous in the way it lingered. I noticed her hand, just as it brushed against the railing, and for the briefest second, it hovered near mine. I didn't move. Didn't pull back. My fingers itched to reach out, but I was caught in the gravity of her nearness, the quiet warmth radiating from her as if proximity alone could ignite something I wasn't ready to name. You don't live this close," she said softly, her voice threading through the night air. "And yet you're always around when I least expect it." I cleared my throat, looking down, trying to mask the sudden heat crawling up my neck. I like to walk sometimes. Clear my head." Her smile deepened, slower now, almost teasing. "Does it clear your head or make you think too much?" Something in the pause, the way she said "think too much," pressed against the edges of my composure. I couldn't meet her eyes, not fully, not without betraying the way my thoughts had wandered over her hands, the curve of her neck, the soft cadence of her voice, the way her laughter would catch midair and leave a fluttering in my chest. She stepped closer then, a deliberate movement that brought her mere inches from me. The porch light cast shadows that danced across her features, slightly tired eyes, soft lines around her mouth, but it was the subtle strength in her posture that held me in place. My fingers itched again, and I realized she moved her hand just enough to almost brush mine as she passed. Almost. I wanted to ask her if she meant it, wanted to hear it again, louder this time. "Safer, stay here tonight." But my voice caught. Instead, I swallowed and nodded, uncertain of why I'd agreed without really agreeing. She tilted her head, just a little, observing me, and then the sound of a door creaking down the hall broke the fragile spell. My heart jumped, my body tensed, and she stiffened too, just slightly, just enough to tell me the night was no longer ours alone. Her gaze flicked toward the hall, then back to me, and for a moment, the air between us pulsed with something unspoken, something waiting, suspended, as though we both knew that the next step, whatever it would be, might change everything. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost teasing, almost dangerous, "Maybe you shouldn't have come out tonight." The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing louder than it should in the small hallway. She moved to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, and I trailed behind silently, trying not to notice how the dim light made her skin glow, how her fingers lingered a moment too long on the countertop. My chest tightened with each small gesture I had no right to read, each subtle smile that seemed meant just for me. "I don't usually let people inside," she said, her voice casual, but I caught the edge of something behind it, maybe a hint of loneliness, maybe a trace of old caution. I know," I muttered, gripping the edge of the table. The words felt insufficient. I stopped. What could I say? That I'd been walking past her house for weeks, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the sound of her laugh? That the way she moved made me forget what I was supposed to be doing. She glanced over her shoulder, a soft laugh escaping her lips. I can tell. Her observation made me flush, though I tried to mask it with a cough. There was something in her eyes, something gentle but knowing, that made it impossible to hide. I noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she set the glass down, a vulnerability that belied her confident exterior. She was always composed, always in control, yet here, now, the edges of her armor softened, just enough for me to see. I've been lonely, I guess, she admitted suddenly, as if the words had been waiting for the right moment. Life gets complicated. I nodded, swallowing. I wanted to reach out, to touch her shoulder, to tell her that I understood in ways I couldn't yet explain. But something stopped me, the distance, her age, her experience, the social lines that whispered impossible. Still, my gaze lingered on her, memorizing the way her hair caught the light, the way her lips moved as she spoke. I wasn't always like this, she added, almost apologetically. I had relationships before. Things that ended badly. Things I shouldn't have done. She paused, looking away briefly, then back at me. It makes me careful now. Careful. That word lodged in my chest. I wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't need to be careful with me, that I would never hurt her. But I knew I couldn't. I could only watch, observe, breathe a little shallower as her nearness made the room feel smaller, more intimate. I tried to focus on the wine she handed me, the warmth of it against my fingers, but the scent of her perfume, something soft, floral, and just slightly intoxicating, made it impossible to think straight. She lingered nearby, brushing against my arm as she reached for a utensil. My stomach clenched, and I forced a casual step back, though part of me wanted her closer. You're quiet, she said, almost teasing, but there was something tender in her tone. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly as she passed, and I felt a jolt of electricity, a current running beneath the surface that neither of us named aloud. Just listen, I said, voice low, careful. My eyes betrayed me, though. They followed her movements, the subtle sway of her hips, the gentle tilt of her head. She smiled, noticing. Or at least I thought she did. She leaned against the counter, close enough for our breaths to mingle, close enough that the space between us seemed charged with unspoken possibility. And then, just as quickly, she pulled back, picking up a napkin with a deliberate air of distance. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something waiting, suspended, a moment stretched thin by anticipation. I noticed her glance flick to mine, brief but deliberate, and I knew she saw the way I saw her. Not like a neighbor. Not like a friend. Something else. Something dangerous, maybe, but irresistible. When she finally touched my hand, just lightly, brushing it in passing, it was enough to make the air shift, enough to confirm that neither of us wanted this to end. A small, fleeting contact, but it left a residue in my chest, a warmth I couldn't name, a question that hung in the quiet kitchen: how far could we go without crossing lines we weren't ready to admit existed? And for the first time that evening, I didn't try to pull back. The sudden buzz of a phone made me jump, heart thudding like it had its own pulse. She sighed, glancing at the screen and then quickly silencing it. It's nothing, she muttered, but the flush on her cheeks betrayed her annoyance. Someone calling now, in this fragile bubble between us, felt like an intrusion, a reminder that the world outside existed and judged. I tried to mask my nerves, but every subtle movement, the way my fingers lingered on the counter, the way I leaned slightly closer as she reached for the wine bottle, felt loud, exposed. My pulse slammed against my ribs, and I realized I was watching her in ways that were both reverent and reckless. She caught my gaze and held it, unflinching, but then looked away, a faint tremor in her lips. You shouldn't read too much into things," she said softly. There was a warning there, but it came laced with something warmer, heavier, as if she weren't entirely certain she meant it. We moved through the kitchen slowly, almost deliberately close. I noticed how her elbow brushed my forearm, and my stomach tightened at the contact. There was nothing overt, nothing scandalous yet, but the tension hummed, electric and unspeakable. I started, my voice faltering. I wanted to say something that made the air between us lighter, less dangerous. But instead I swallowed, noticing the way her chest rose subtly as she inhaled, how her eyes followed my every movement, not quite meeting mine. A shadow fell across the doorway suddenly, and my heart jumped. A neighbor? Her sister? A friend? Paused just long enough for me to freeze, too aware of the space between us, too conscious of how our proximity could betray everything. She stepped in, and we both pulled slightly apart, though our shoulders still brushed, still charged with unspoken electricity. The intruder lingered a moment, then left, unaware of the near confession they'd interrupted. We exhaled in tandem, and for a beat the silence wrapped around us, thick with anticipation. She turned slowly, her hand brushing mine again, not by accident I could tell, and I felt a jolt run through me, the kind that makes you forget your own caution. Her voice came, low and deliberate. "You shouldn't." She trailed off, and the unsaid words trembled in the air, heavier than any declaration. My fingers twitched, aching to close the distance, to just let the moment carry us forward. We were inches apart now, the heat of her body pressing lightly against me without either of us moving. Her hair brushed my cheek when she leaned to reach for the glass on the counter, and I wanted to lean closer, wanted to taste the warmth that hovered just beyond the line we hadn't crossed. But there was guilt there. Hesitation. The echo of what everyone else would say if they saw us. And yet, my resolve faltered. Every breath, every micro-movement, was a thread pulling us closer, defying logic, defying caution. I shouldn't," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly now, a hint of confession or maybe fear. Her hand lingered near mine on the countertop, hovering, almost touching, and I imagined what it would feel like to close the distance, to let everything spill into that one forbidden act. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible force, we moved closer anyway, shoulders brushing, breaths mingling, our proximity speaking in the language of desire and restraint. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, fast, shallow, and strangely intimate. We didn't speak. Words would have ruined it. The air was thick with what was almost said, almost done, almost undone. We froze like that, closer than ever, trembling on the edge of something we weren't ready to name, caught between restraint and surrender. And in that silence, in that charged breath, we both knew the next moment could break the fragile control we had left. The quiet in the living room pressed against me, thick and suffocating, like we were the only two people left in the world. Her shoulder brushed mine as she reached for a book on the shelf, and my chest tightened with the weight of her proximity. Every small movement, her hand lingering on the spine of the book, the tilt of her head, the soft sigh she didn't quite hide, felt amplified, charged, dangerous. I could no longer ignore the pull between us. Every careful thought I had tried to hold in check shattered when she turned, catching my gaze, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. You've been here so many times," she murmured, voice soft, almost accusatory. I don't know why I let it matter." Her words struck me, not because they were a rebuke, but because they revealed the fragility beneath her usual composure. I wanted to tell her that I couldn't stay away, that every glance, every small encounter had been nothing but building toward this moment, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I stepped closer, drawn by something older, deeper, reckless. Her breath hitched slightly as my hand brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. It was a tentative touch, yet it carried all the force of intention. She shivered, or maybe I imagined it, but I could feel her leaning, ever so slightly, into the motion, as if daring me to go further. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice low, tremulous. But her body betrayed her. She didn't step back. Not fully. Not when our knees brushed as we shifted closer. Not when our hands hovered, almost touching, on the same space of countertop. Not when her scent, jasmine, warm, impossible, filled the space around me. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted, voice just above a whisper, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. "About you. About this." Her eyes softened, flicking down to my lips and then back to mine, searching, questioning, daring. "This what?" she breathed, though I knew she knew exactly what I meant. There was a sharp edge to her restraint, a quiet war being waged in every line of her posture. I moved a fraction closer. My hand brushed hers, just a whisper of contact, but the electricity was immediate, visceral, a current that threatened to overwhelm everything else. She leaned a fraction closer, hair grazing my cheek, breath warming my skin, and I could no longer separate the desire from the guilt, the hesitation from the need. "God," she whispered, almost to herself, almost lost in the tension, almost lost to me. Her lips trembled as if she were about to say something daring, something irreversible. I could feel my own mouth dry, my own resolve crumbling. We froze, suspended, the room contracting around the small space we occupied. The world outside, the judgment, the age gap, the social rules, faded to nothing. Only the heat of her body against mine, the brush of her fingers, the nearness of her lips remained. And then she tilted her head, a subtle but deliberate motion, eyes locking on mine, lips parting as though to say the one thing neither of us could yet speak aloud. My hand lingered at her jawline, thumb brushing her skin, breath mingling. The line between restraint and surrender blurred, every second stretching impossibly long. She began, but the words caught in her throat. My own lips parted instinctively, drawn toward her, toward the moment we'd both been circling, and the air hummed with the promise of what was about to happen. The world paused. The next second could undo everything, or finally set it free. The moment lingered longer than it should have, the air between us taut with anticipation. I thought I knew her, thought I understood the careful balance she kept, the walls she'd built around herself. But then she pulled back, just slightly, and a flicker of unease crossed her face, one I hadn't seen before. I have to tell you something," she said, voice low, hesitant, almost trembling. My chest tightened. Something in her tone suggested this was serious, that the fragile control we'd maintained was about to shatter. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. "Okay. Whatever it is, you can tell me." She looked down, biting her lip, fingers fiddling with the edge of a curtain. "It's about last week. The neighbor, you know, when you thought no one was watching?" Her words faltered. "He overheard us. Not everything, but enough. Enough to misinterpret." My stomach sank. I'd known someone could walk in, could interrupt, but overhearing? The intimacy, the tension, the unspoken desire we'd let linger now suddenly felt exposed, dangerous. My hand twitched at my side, brushing against the countertop as if grounding myself, but my pulse raced anyway. She lifted her eyes, and I caught the subtle shift, shoulders hunched slightly, a vulnerability breaking through her usual poise. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to ruin what we have, even if it's complicated." I stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability I'd been waiting to see for weeks, and my fingers itched to reach for hers. Instead, I kept the faintest distance, aware that the line between comfort and danger had just blurred. "I don't care what anyone thinks," I whispered, barely audible, voice thick with urgency. "Not now. Not when you're like this." I gestured subtly to her, the closeness, the warmth, the way her presence made the world shrink. Her breath itched, almost imperceptibly, and her hand brushed mine accidentally, or not so accidentally, when she shifted. The electricity surged again, stronger this time, a wave we couldn't contain. My fingers lingered near hers, trembling slightly, and she didn't move them away. Instead, she leaned in a fraction closer, letting the air between us thrum with something we weren't allowed to name. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice low, a tremor in every word. "It's risky. Age, perception, everything." Her gaze flicked to the window, then back at me, searching for assurance, or perhaps permission, or maybe something neither of us could give. I swallowed hard, trying to fight the pulse of desire that pressed against every rational thought. "Risky or not," I said quietly, I can't stop thinking about this. About you." Her lips parted, almost to respond, almost to confess something irrevocable, but her hand twitched against mine, stepping back just slightly. I followed her, unconsciously closing the distance again, until our breaths mingled. She leaned, just enough, into the pressure, the weight of our proximity folding us together in a tension that neither wanted to resolve yet. We stayed like that, suspended, caught between fear and longing, between restraint and surrender. The knowledge that someone could misinterpret us should have made me pull away, should have made her retreat into the safety of distance, but neither of us did. And then she said it, words soft but daring. If we keep going, it can't just be this secret, can it?" I felt my heart hammer. Her words didn't need finishing. They were an invitation, a challenge, a confession all at once. I brushed a strand of hair from her face again, letting my thumb graze her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. My breath mingled with hers. The air between us was alive, charged, and for the first time that evening, everything outside, the neighbor, the rules, the consequences, felt distant. We both knew a decision had to be made, and the moment of choice was already upon us. I closed the small gap, enough for her to feel my presence fully, but not enough to cross the point of no return, yet. The room felt smaller than ever, the quiet heavy and pressing, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She stood in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands, the flutter of her lashes against her cheeks. My own fingers itched to reach out, to trace her face, to close the tiny space between us, but I hesitated, knowing that hesitation was a choice in itself. I don't know if I should," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but every word struck me like a pulse in my chest. Her gaze flicked to my lips and back, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head a silent invitation. I swallowed, heart hammering. "Neither do I," I admitted, voice low, a whisper of confession. "But I can't stop being here. Not now. Not when it feels like this." Her breath caught, and she shifted just slightly closer, brushing against my shoulder. The contact was electric, a spark that made me tense and shiver, aware of every micro-movement, the rise of her chest, the tilt of her neck, the warmth radiating from her as if proximity alone could set the world on fire. "I'm scared," she said, voice soft, almost breaking. "Of everything. Of what people might think. Of losing control." Her hand hovered near mine, brushing my fingers, trembling. She didn't pull away. I closed the last fraction of space between us, letting my thumb rest lightly against her jaw, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. My own breath mingled with hers, shallow, uneven, and impossibly intimate. "Then we do it together," I murmured, careful, deliberate. We decide right here that this, whatever this is ours for now. Her eyes searched mine, wide and vulnerable, and in that instant, everything fell away. The neighbor who might have overheard, the rules, the age gap, the fear. Only the quiet understanding between us remained, raw and human and unpolished. I felt her lean, just a fraction, into my chest, enough to feel the press of her body, the weight of her hesitation, the softness of surrender that hovered just beneath it. My hand cupped her cheek lightly, thumbs stroking in small, careful circles, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she let herself feel, let herself be close. She began, then stopped, a breathless pause that carried all the confession she couldn't quite voice. My heart ached with the recognition of it, the messy, human acknowledgement that we were both walking the edge of desire and restraint, knowing either choice would leave a mark. The space between us vanished when she finally leaned fully, pressing her forehead against mine. Our breaths mingled, uneven, warm, and the tension that had built over days, the longing, the guilt, the almost too close moments, was released in the quiet contact. No words were needed. No promises. Only the mutual understanding that we had reached this point together, messy and flawed, but fully ourselves. I rested my forehead against hers, thumbs still brushing her cheek, and whispered, "I understand. I've always understood." Her hand closed lightly over mine, a small, grounding pressure, and I felt her nod, subtle but deliberate. In that single, quiet gesture, everything crystallized: the attraction, the risk, the human vulnerability, and the unspoken agreement to be here, fully present, even if the world outside never understood. We stayed like that for a long moment, hearts beating in tandem, inches apart yet intimately entwined in a way that no words could capture. The air was thick with something neither of us wanted to name, yet both of us understood completely. And finally, for the first time, clarity settled over us, not as a resolution to everything outside, but as a mutual understanding. Whatever happened next, we had chosen this moment, together, fully human, fully alive. The quiet after our choice felt different, lighter somehow. The tension that had wrapped around us for days, for weeks, finally loosened, leaving a warmth that was soft and human, not perfect but deeply real. She sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers brushing mine as I lowered myself beside her, careful not to break the fragile intimacy, careful not to rush what had taken so long to arrive. We didn't speak immediately. Words would have spoiled it. Instead, our hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining in a gentle, unhurried rhythm. I felt her thumb trace small circles over mine, and the small motion said more than anything either of us could have said aloud. "I was so nervous," she admitted finally, voice low, almost embarrassed. Her head leaned against my shoulder, light but insistent. I could feel her breath, warm and steady, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her presence fit against me like it had always belonged there. "You?" I asked softly. "You don't look nervous now." Her laugh was quiet, hesitant, tinged with vulnerability. "I don't, not with you," she said. She turned slightly, resting her forehead against mine. The gesture was tender, messy, and utterly human. My own heart thudded with a mixture of relief, awe, and longing, everything wrapped into one simple touch. For a while, we just stayed there, close enough to feel each other's warmth, letting the world exist outside the walls of her living room. The age gap, the fear of judgment, the hesitation, all of it faded into insignificance when measured against the weight of this quiet intimacy. Her fingers tightened around mine, almost as if anchoring herself to the moment, and I responded instinctively, letting her lead us both into a small, grounding rhythm. There was no need for dramatic confessions now. The understanding between us had been earned through weeks of glances, almost words, near misses, and whispered breaths. I didn't think this would ever feel real, she murmured, tilting her head to press a brief kiss to my temple. The simplicity of it, the softness, carried 1,000 words I couldn't have spoken. I breathed in her scent, warm, faintly floral, completely hers, and whispered, "It is real. Right now it's real. And that's enough." She smiled, small and uncertain at first, then wider, letting herself settle fully against me. I felt her body relax, a surrender that was not defeat but trust, and I leaned into her, careful, aware, fully present. Our foreheads pressed together, a gentle bridge between us, and in that simple contact, all the doubts, the hesitation, the fears of what others might think, dissolved. We stayed that way long after the world outside grew quiet. Fingers intertwined, heads resting together, breaths mingling. The slow, messy human warmth between us said everything: desire, affection, understanding, and the quiet thrill of choosing each other despite everything. And when at last we pulled back slightly, it was not with fear but with clarity. We had crossed the impossible line and found something human, flawed, and beautiful waiting for us on the other side. We didn't need more words. One final brush of lips to a forehead, one lingering squeeze of intertwined fingers, and it was enough. Enough to say, "We are here. Together." And we chose it. The evening faded outside, and we remained quiet, close, safe in the delicate intimacy we had finally earned.